And joining me now on the late edition here on Bloomberg TV and radio is Elizabeth Wydra, president of the Constitutional Accountability Center. Elizabeth, welcome back to Bloomberg. When you consider just broadly the institutional lack of trust it seems has developed in the American electoral system, very foundation of this republic, what do you think the authors of the Constitution would be thinking right now about where we've come?
Well, I think they would be shocked and disappointed, frankly. The fact is that we do have free and fair elections here in the United States, and we have the will of the people respected. We saw significant erosion of that when Donald Trump refused to accept the results of the 2020 election, rejecting the will of the people, which is something that, I think the founders definitely would be afraid of, that could recur. We're already seeing the playbook from 2020 come back already in this cycle before the election. After the 2020 election, we saw all of these lawsuits by the Trump campaign, alleging irregularities. They all went nowhere, even in front of Trump-appointed judges. And so there are absolutely no credible claims that anyone other than eligible voters are the ones who are voting. And when there are these extraordinarily rare instances where someone else tries to vote who isn't eligible, the system works and stops that. So we're seeing this doubt cast, but the reality is that democracy works when we respect the will of the people and respect the hardworking election and poll workers who help to make it work.
I do want to get into the legal challenges we could see after the election, but we've already seen a number of them borne out and news on them in just recent days, Elizabeth. Yesterday, for example, the Supreme Court ruling on the side of Virginia, upholding their ability to remove voters from rolls less than 90 days out from Election Day based off of DMV data that would suggest that they are not citizens and therefore cannot vote. Federal law does dictate that 90-day period does exist. So what do you make of that ruling, the decision by the court?
Frankly, was a ruling that was contrary to federal law. There's a unmistakable federal statute that says you can't make changes like this, systematic purges of voter rolls this close to an election. And the Supreme Court's action seems to go directly contrary to that. It also wasn't a reasoned and argued decision. This was what's on the Supreme Court's so-called shadow docket. It's Halloween. Lots of things are spooky. Shadows are out there that are scary. And let me tell you, the shadow docket of the Supreme Court can be scary. And that certainly is a decision that, seems to have no basis in federal law. And it really could result in some voters in Virginia who have the right to vote, who have the right to have their voices heard in this election, not being able to cast their votes. And that's un-American. And, people of all parties from all places should be opposed to that. We should all be able to have our voices heard. And, it's already unlawful for non-citizens to vote. We know that this is not a widespread problem. And so, it does seem like this is just an attempt to get some voices, prevent them from having their voices heard at the ballot box because some people want to gain power, whatever the cost, even if the cost is to American democracy.
Well, of course, the deadline to have your voice heard at the ballot box is Tuesday. The election will happen. We aren't, though, expecting necessarily the election to be settled in even the 24 hours after that necessarily. And earlier this month, we caught up with Joe Trippi, now at the Lincoln Project. He ran Howard Dean's presidential campaign, and this was his prediction for how long this could all take. Take a listen.
I think this thing could go on for days after the election. It doesn't mean that it won't be questioned, that doubt won't be out there, that legal challenges will happen, that Trump will not agree that he lost, that he did, and we'll see how that all plays out. But no, I think the 76 days between November 5th through January 20th, the inauguration day, may be just as important as what happens on election night.
So obviously, Elizabeth, there's a number of things that need to happen in that 76-day period. On December 17th, the actual electors of the electoral colleges will meet at their state capitals. They will cast their votes. Those go to Congress. They're supposed to certify them on January 6th. Then ultimately the inauguration happens 2 weeks later. If there are a ton of legal challenges casting doubt on the outcome of these votes and therefore on those electoral votes? Is that process potentially going to be delayed? I mean, what's the realistic potential outcome here?
I think, again, looking back to what we saw in 2020, there were, it's kind of here we go again, like what we saw there. But we saw all of these attacks on the process, and the process was borne out to be free and fair. And these hardworking election officials who are people from our community working at the polls, working to make the system work in the way it's supposed to in our democratic republic, they're going to be working really hard, and they're under an unprecedented level of threat this year. And so that job is even harder. There are these kind of preceded claims from Trump-aligned entities and the Trump campaign themselves trying to cast out in advance, I think in case the campaign can't win at the ballot box, to then, try to thwart the will of the people through the legal process. But as we saw in the 2020 election, even when it's under attack, as we've seen, our democratic system, sometimes it takes time, but it's important to get it right. And, I have faith in those election workers that are laboring so hard and are under this unprecedented threat this election cycle, not just harassment, but also violence and fear for their lives. But they're working hard for democracy and to make sure that all the votes are counted. So I think that even if it takes a little bit of time, the focus is on getting it right and making sure that the people's voices are counted correctly. And we've seen that work time and time again. And even though there are these rather widespread attempts by filing these lawsuits, even if they go nowhere, the fact that they've been filed has been used by some to point to questions, to say there are questions about the process. But so it's kind of a circular argument. We file these lawsuits, then we can say there are questions, but then the lawsuits go nowhere, so there actually isn't any there. And we saw that play out already in 2020, and I think it'll most likely be unsuccessful this go-round as well.
All right, Elizabeth Wydra, president of the Constitutional Accountability Center, thank you for joining. And something tells me we're going to have to check in with you again next week and in the weeks to come.